Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 494. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're excited to have with us the internationally acclaimed and celebrated Vermont author, Melissa Perley.
Thank you so much, Barney. That is the best intro I've had. I can tell you that. So thank you so much. So much. And 494, wow.
See, there you go. See, there's going to be some sort of symbolism between the for 494. It's got to be, right?
Well, that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking it's better than 495. There's just a little edginess to it.
Right. See? Yeah. Like if you even look at the number 494, it just kind of like exudes poetry. I don't know. There's something about that. See? Yeah.
Right. I'll keep it.
You'll keep it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so Melissa, you're no straight. So we're here to talk about your children's book, obviously,
right.
But you also have a long running blog, A Life in Vermont.
I do. Yes.
Yeah.
I have the blog actually kind of started life as a musical blog, The Cellist, and it won an award. It was great. And then it kind of morphed because kind of an interesting thing, I think, is that besides I'm a professional cellist and I teach and perform, and we have a string instrument business, and we also have a sheep farm. So, it's kind of like these two worlds that mesh together and let us use both sides of our brains. And so I decided that I wanted to kind of turn and write about that as well as music. So that's what A Life in Vermont is. It kind of encompasses all of it.
So do you describe yourself as a cellist, a farmer, an author? How do you?
Kind of all of it, right?
All of it, yeah.
All of it. And it's interesting is I was, somebody asked me to come to a school for 7th graders. I think about it because you were talking about your daughter. And they said, what if you could go back and speak to your younger self, what would you say you should learn in school? And I think they wanted me to say math. They wanted me to say something. And I said, I think you should learn about everything so that you can do anything. And I believe that because I don't believe we're just I believe we're multidimensional. I don't believe we're just, we don't only have one thing that we can do. So that's kind of my mantra.
Right. Now, so let's talk a little bit about the Violin Family.
Yes.
What's the origin story of the Violin Family?
So the first book is The Violin Family. And what I thought one day was I was actually standing there, and you have seen the violin and probably the viola. I don't know. Do you know strings? Kind of?
I know the ukulele, Melissa.
Yeah, I know that. But yes. So what I did was I was standing in the shop one day and I was looking at them, and they are all the same, only different sized. And so what I thought to myself was, this is the Violin Family. That is their technical term. They are the Violin Family. And then I thought, what if I wrote about that and I used it as a fictional family, but also educated kids about strings and helped the school programs by doing things like that. And so that's how I started with the Violin Family. And it's actually a true story. I don't want to, spoiler alert, I don't want to give it away, but it is a true story of my playing somewhere and, playing with bass and violin and viola, and I'm the cellist.
Okay. All right.
Then I have the second one, which is the sequel.
Really? Ooh.
Yes.
Okay.
So the second one is The Violin Family Plays New Music. And that is the one that just released in October. And do you have that one? Or should I sneak it into the...
Yeah.
There it is.
Hold it right up. There it is.
There it is. And that one is a follow-up, and that is now that the Violin Family meets their neighbors, the Woodwinds, and she plays with the clarinet. And what I tried to do, Barney, and I'm proud of it. The first one won an award, and I'm really proud of that. And this one, what I've done is I've taken the idea that a clarinet, if you think about it, it doesn't look like a stringed instrument. strings are made of wood and clarinet is made of, I don't even know what. And, they're just totally different. And so what I did was I said their family didn't really want them to play together because they didn't look alike and they didn't sound alike. And so I thought that, it was speaking to a lot of stuff that's going on today too, in a way that kids can understand. So that's where we're kind of going with it. We're using the instruments in like a symphony and telling the stories of them in a way, like I said, that kids understand, but teaches them something as well.
Yeah. So you mentioned us, like, we're talking about music education in story form.
Yeah.
Have your own students reacted to seeing their instruments turned into characters at all?
Well, they have, but I had to be careful. I had the first book that you had up there was Fiona McLean was the illustrator, and the second one is Tim Knickerbocker, the one who's done this one. And I was really careful about asking them to be true to what an instrument looks like. I did not want them to have hands, so it was a big job. You're asking them to say, do something that's teachable, but they also speak. Like but I find that you have kids, they suspend belief really easily. They're very happy to believe that an instrument can talk in many ways, playing it or that it speaks. So I went on that. I went on faith on that. And it's worked because I go a lot of places with the book and kids really enjoy that part of it.
Right. Now, so what details, then you mentioned, like what details about instrument anatomy or sound were most important for you to kind of like sneak into the narrative then?
Yeah. Well, what I wanted to do was talk about how an instrument made, how they make sound. And then when I did, the new one is talking about the woodwinds. And of course, that's a very different sound, right? So we were talking about the difference between those sounds. And what I did to keep it true to teaching is I did it's a glossary of terms in the back of both of the books so that I could use actual words. Like my husband, Paul, is a luthier. And most people don't know what a luthier is, but I figured that what I could do is use the term luthier in both of the books as a stringed instrument doctor. And then what can happen is when you're reading the book to your kids, you can say, what does that mean? And then you can go to the back of the book and you can find out what a luthier actually means. And so that kept my publisher happy because I could use bigger words and words that were technically a little bit challenging, but you could still look it up and understand what I was saying.
So what did you learn about writing a children's book that surprised you?
Well, that's a good question because I think the thing I learned the most about it was how amazingly detailed it is to write a book, like how many pages you have to have, and there has to be the blank page, and you have to register with the Library of Congress, and there's just a lot to it. And so I learned a lot from the first book moving into the second book. It was a lot easier the second time, and I had to get an illustrator. Like I said, Tim Knickerbocker, he's in Florida, so now we're doing the whole technical thing where he's sending me illustrations back and forth, and I love it because he told me that in order to write a book, the second book is set in the winter, first book is set in the fall, and in the winter he's in Florida. So he said he had to put on headphones with Christmas music to get him kind of in the vibe of drawing for Vermont. And he did a great job. So those are the things that I learned is like how to write a book, how to write, in a way that a publisher is actually going to accept the book and all of the, the technique that goes with that. So, but the story, I have 4 sons and read to them all the time. Loved reading to them, love different books and different stories. And I have children in my studio. I have adults in my studio. And I just thought, I don't know how it is near you, but the school programs you think they have band, but they don't have orchestra very much. It's losing all of its funding. So the other part of this is for me to help kind of get this publicized so that school programs will keep strings in their schools. Sometimes I take this to do a program and the kids don't even know what I have in my hand, which I think is sad.
Right. And so it does kind of bring up the other question for you is that like for how do you envision teachers utilizing your books as a how do you see it fitting into like a music teacher's
Like a
toolkit or a
curriculum.
school, or a school
Yeah.
library program?
I think it works great in a curriculum and in libraries. What I do with my husband is we come into bookstores or things like that, and I read and I'll bring my instrument and I'll play a little bit. Then we also bring what I call a stringed instrument petting zoo. And I bring like a viola and a violin in different sizes. I cannot tell you how many adults hop on this train. Like how many adults are like, can I play? And they've got this tiny little violin, but they're thrilled, and I let the kids get their hands on them. I have been in tears more times than I can tell you when a kid picks up an instrument for the first time and bows across it and makes sound themselves. And then they look up at me with these huge eyes like they cannot believe that has happened. So that in itself is such a great opener for libraries and for bookstores and things. And school curriculum, it's another thing to help introduce that into their school in a way that it's a picture book with, it's a story picture book. So you're probably going to like 8, 10 is the top, ages. So, little kids, that's how you introduce music. So it's a great way to get that in there.
It's amazing that music should just be a standard curriculum for all children, all school age children,
100%.
because study upon study show that children who practice an instrument also do well in other classes.
Right. It's interesting. I read something recently that was talking about when kids are playing music or reading music or, having something to do with music or adults, our synapses in our brains are just firing like fireworks. So it's like so good for all of us to have our brain doing this. And we're hardwired for music. I'm not sure everybody knows that. You know how when you're at a concert and you see like a 3-year-old bouncing in rhythm to the music and you're like, how does that kid, like they're 3, but we're hardwired for music. I think people forget that. So what would be more important than introducing our kids to music in school? I don't see literally anything that they're learning that would be more important than that.
Well, hey there. If you're enjoying our podcast, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Your support means the world to us and helps us keep this show going. We love hearing from you, so any feedback is welcome. And thank you for being a part of our podcast family and for all your support. It truly means a lot to us. What is it, other than kind of like telling a story, what's the lesson behind this that you want parents who are reading this to their children and children who are reading it themselves take away?
Yeah. Well, a couple things. In the new book, like I talked to you about he doesn't look like the string, the clarinet doesn't look like the string instrument, and yet they make beautiful music together. And I think what I want them to take away from that is something bigger than just the fact that they're 2 instruments playing together. The fact that they are different and yet they make beautiful music and they can speak to each other and understand each other anyway. I think that's a bigger lesson. In the first book, it's a family, and there's all the lessons of being a family, of being kind to each other and helping each other through things and standing beside each other. So I've tried to make it so that the Violin Family represents reality and fiction both.
And did you kind of have fun kind of creating personalities for each one?
I did. I had a great time. Basil the Bass, my dad, who died 4 years ago, my dad was Basil, and he was 6'3" and big and imposing. And I started there and worked from there. And so he is Basil Bass in my books. So I loved that. And I have a friend that I play with who's a violist, and her name is Elizabeth, and we call her Bizzy. And Bizzy Viola is in my book. So, and I make her do a lot of fun things. I kind of get at her a little bit from the side with the book.
And so when you wrote the first book, The Violin Family, what were some of the surprises that you learned about yourself as a writer when you put this book together?
Well, I think what I find the most when I'm writing, whether it's writing the blog or writing this, is I have to be careful. I think this is true for everybody who writes. We hear it in our heads and we understand it in our heads. And what has to happen is, are we writing something that is legible for other people? I don't mean just grammatically correct, but am I taking what I'm saying, and can people read that and feel what I'm feeling, smell what I'm feeling, all those things? Can that get across? And I think that was something that I had to stop and think about when I was writing, and I do in the blog as well.
Right.
A lot of editing.
And how was the reception for this book when it came to kids when they read it for the first time?
They really liked it. When I read it to kids, like I've been doing a lot of it for the new book recently, that people ask me to come, and I come to these events, and they really like it because there is not a lot of stories about musical instruments out there. And so I feel really happy that I was able to touch upon something that's so important. And what I really hope is that it gets into schools so that the school programs get kind of, the parents get after the school programs and say, let's, my kid was interested in orchestra. My kid loved to play this violin. Why aren't you offering this violin in school? You're offering band, but you're not offering strings. So that's what I'm really hoping happens.
Well, and so for our listeners and readers out there, listeners and viewers out there, correct me if I'm wrong, there are 4 families, right? You have string, woodwind, brass, and percussion, correct?
Yes, very good.
Right, yeah. And so now this has always been a question that there seems to be 2 schools of thought on. Piano, is that a string or a percussion?
Piano is a percussive instrument.
Okay, because it hits, but it hits a string.
It's got hammers, right? It's got hammers. Right. Whereas you think about it, a string is called a sustained instrument because our sound when we draw the bow is sustained. And interestingly enough, when I'm teaching someone, if it's classical, which is what I teach, but I do all kinds of stuff with them, fiddle and stuff, but classical music is sustained. So you go from one note to the other without breaking the phrase unless you're asked to with certain markings. Whereas piano is boop, 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 percussive.
Right. Has there been any playful commentary by, say, like brass instrument players or anything saying, "Hey, what's going on here, Melissa? Where's the?"
They do. Well, since I play in this jazz duo, my friend Tom, who actually he comes up with me when we're down in Manchester, Vermont. We're going to do a program in June, and they've asked us afterwards to do a concert afterward, which we will do. And he's gotten he teaches down in Rutland, and he's gotten quite a lot about being part of this book. So so I find a lot of my friends are kind of like, why don't you write a book about a French horn? They all want to be in on it. So I will.
Did the book go in a direction that you weren't expecting when you're drafting it? Like, did the characters go in a direction that you weren't expecting?
A little bit. What I find is they have to, I think about something like when you read, for example, like Harry Potter, and you think about how did she decide how Hermione was, or, how she felt. And I think that is, I understand that more now because now from one book to the other, the characters have stayed the same, and I find them with their own personalities and the things that they say and the things that they do and who would do this and who would do that, and I know right away who it is. So they become almost like your family because they're coming from inside you, right? They're coming from your experiences. That's the best kind of writing, is when you're writing about things you know.
Right. Did you get any feedback, positive or negative, about the personalities that you gave each of the instruments?
No. My mother was wondering why there wasn't anyone by the name of Carol. That's a whole other book, Bernie. So no, nobody gave me too much trouble about that except her.
How much? What's what I'm looking for is how much did with the first one with Fiona and the other one with Tim? Yeah. How much did they tweak, or did they give you feedback like, well, actually visually I need to do this, or visually you would need to put the words over here? How much did they, how much of them were in the books?
Fiona, this was Fiona's first book that she had done. And so she had a lot to learn too. There's a big learning curve because now the illustrator has to format the book. right? So the illustrator has to know how big something has to be, and like you said, where the words go, what side they go on. They have to format everything. So, and it depends, what you want to say. If you leave a big gap between thoughts, it changes the way the book comes across, right? If the story is broken in half incorrectly, there's a big gaping hole in what you're trying to say. So it's a hugely important job, and I consider it like a completely equal. It's like a duet, right? It's a completely equal collaboration between two people. And I've been really lucky working with both of them. Tim was wonderful. He has a lot of experience. And so he was wonderful about saying to me, what if I did this? And he was really good about letting me come back to him and say, could we put more of this? Could there be more snow here? Can we make him have a different kind of hat? And he had me send pictures of like my husband, Paul, and the luthier. And so when I got that, if you look at the picture in that book, it really does look like my husband. So it's a great thing for me moving forward for our kids and everything, because it's, it's going to live on.
If a young musician told you that they wanted to write their own music themed story, what advice would you give them?
It's funny is I always am telling kids, whether I'm teaching kids, I want them to write music. That's part of my studio. You can tell your daughter that. It's very good. Not only is it good for us, for our brain, like we were talking about, but it's we all learn something if we put something down. And for example, you have 4 beats in a measure as an example. And you know what? If it doesn't add up to 4, I can't play it for them. So they'll write it, and then I'll have them bring it in to me, and then I will play it without them saying anything to me. So I think the same thing for a book. Have kids write a book. That's a great idea and a great way to do it. And do your illustrations, and then have someone read it. And does it say what you want to say? Does that person in the book sound like you wanted them to sound? Is it coming across the way you wanted it to? And kids are great, because they'll sit there and they'll say, I didn't want him to do that. And you can say, but that's what he's doing. Right. And then they'll go back and they'll edit it themselves and fix it. So I'm a big proponent of having kids, especially now, right? There's so much computer stuff. Write it down, color it with crayons, whatever.
Melissa, what's next for you? You have you already have 2 Violin Family stories out. Are you going to have a brass themed one? You're going to have a percussion themed one? What's next?
I can't tell you that, or I'd have to kill you. But I am going to. I don't know. Have you ever seen? I found in an old bookstore once an album of Leonard Bernstein, and it was like Meet the Orchestra. Have you ever heard of that? Did you ever hear of something like that from Leonard Bernstein? Well, anyway, what he did was, it's one of those old albums that he's talking on the album, and then he has the trumpet play, and then and I kind of thought, this is great, because you would sit there and you could envision the whole symphony. So my idea is to take certain characteristics about the instruments and build a story around them that is also relevant to the world today and going to benefit people in some way, build families, build love, all that kind of thing. And then I will figure out who fits in next. Maybe percussion, because it sounds like a heartbeat. I don't know.
Right. This is great. So listen, you're going to have to come back on then. You're going to have to come back on again, Melissa, when you have your 3rd book out.
I will come to the studio, and then we'll go have lunch at Tuttle's.
That's right. There you go. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Melissa.
Thank you so much for having me, Barney. I had a great time, and I appreciate it very much.